The Doolittle Raid was America's first strike back after Pearl Harbor, but what they didn't tell you is how it led to one of history's most horrific revenge massacres. In April 1942, 16 B-25 bombers took off from the USS Hornet on a mission that would change the course of two nations, but not in the way anyone expected. The Doolittle Raid, named after Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, was meant to be America's mighty response to Pearl Harbor. But this story isn't about American heroism. It's about the devastating price that innocent Chinese civilians paid for it. The raid itself caused minimal damage to Japan. A few bombs dropped, some buildings destroyed, and American morale boosted. But what happened next would haunt East Asia for generations. After the American pilots crash-landed in China, Japanese forces unleashed a fury that would make the devils themselves shudder. The Japanese military's Operation Sei-go began as a hunt for the American airmen, but it quickly transformed into something far more sinister. In the Zhejiang and Jiangxi provinces, Japanese troops moved from village to village with methodical brutality. They weren't just looking for Americans anymore, they were seeking vengeance. In Nanchang, the horror reached its peak. Japanese soldiers rounded up entire families. Children were torn from their mothers' arms. The elderly weren't spared. The Japanese military had a chilling motto during this campaign: kill all, burn all, loot all. And they lived up to every word of it. The methods of execution were designed to inflict maximum terror. Some victims were buried alive. Others were used as live targets for bayonet practice. In some villages, the Japanese troops forced families to watch as they executed their loved ones one by one. The lucky ones died quickly. The unfortunate endured tortures that defy description. The numbers are staggering. In just 3 months, an estimated 250,000 Chinese civilians were slaughtered. That's equivalent to wiping out an entire city. The Japanese troops didn't just kill, they destroyed everything that could sustain life. Rice fields were burned, wells were poisoned, and entire villages were reduced to ash. But the horror didn't end with death. The Japanese army deployed biological weapons in the region: cholera, typhoid, and plague. They poisoned water sources and spread disease-carrying fleas. These weapons continued to claim lives long after the massacre ended. The most chilling aspect? The US military knew about these reprisals. Intelligence reports detailed the massacres, but in the fog of war, these atrocities were buried under the narrative of American victory. The Doolittle Raid was celebrated while the deaths of 250,000 Chinese civilians became a footnote in history. Even more disturbing, many of the Japanese officers responsible for these atrocities were never brought to justice. Some even went on to have successful careers in post-war Japan. The commander who ordered the massacres died peacefully in his bed decades later. The survivors lived with their trauma in silence. Many Chinese families today still carry the scars of those 3 months of terror. Villages that once thrived remain empty, serving as ghost towns that echo with the screams of the past. The Doolittle Raid is still taught in American military academies as a brilliant tactical mission, but in the Chinese provinces of Zhejiang and Jiangxi, it's remembered differently. There, it's known as the beginning of the killing time, when one military action led to one of history's most devastating revenge massacres. This is more than just a story of wartime casualties. It's a stark reminder that military actions, no matter how strategically sound, often carry hidden costs. While America celebrated its first strike back at Japan, 250,000 innocent Chinese paid the ultimate price, a price that history has largely chosen to forget.